The truck never had a chance. Claire watched through her scope as the autonomous turret swiveled, smooth, mechanical, utterly indifferent, and opened fire on the civilian evacuation vehicle crawling down Route 504. Not militia, not enemy combatants. A flatbed truck with white sheets tied to the mirrors. 3 seconds of sustained fire, then silence. Her radio crackled once and died. Wind shifted hard off the caldera. She had a firing solution on the turret housing. 340 meters, slight downhill, left to right crosswind at 11 knots and climbing. She had maybe 3 seconds before the system reacquired. Her finger found the trigger. Gravel shifted behind her. Someone else was already aiming. Ash fell like snow, not the soft, drifting kind that made children run outside with their tongues out. This was finer than talcum powder, gray-white and relentless, coating every surface it touched with a thin, mineral skin that smelled faintly of sulfur and something older, something geological and indifferent to human timelines. Staff Sergeant Claire Maddox lay prone on the collapsed roof of the Coldwater Ridge Ranger Station and watched it fall. She had been in position for 4 hours. The exclusion zone stretched in every direction. 12 miles of restricted terrain surrounding the northern flank of Mount St. Helens, Washington State. The 1980 eruption had reshaped this landscape so thoroughly that the Army Corps of Engineers still hadn't finished mapping the subsurface cavities. Lava tubes ran beneath the terrain like a hidden circulatory system. Some of them were stable, some weren't. The Geological Survey from 2 years ago had flagged 11 sites as Category 3 instability risks. Nobody lived here anymore. That was the official position anyway. Claire pressed her eye to the Schmidt and Bender scope and swept the town of Coldwater Flats, what remained of it. The eruption had flattened most of the original settlement. What stood now was a ghost of the ghost. 4 intact structures, 2 partially standing, the rest reduced to foundation slabs and chimney stacks rising from the ash-gray earth like broken teeth. The logging community had been evacuated in stages. First the 1980 blast, then the 2003 Lahar warning. Then the federal exclusion order that came down 18 months ago citing renewed seismic activity and autonomous defense system testing in restricted airspace. That last part hadn't made the news. Claire had read the classified annex. She was beginning to wish she hadn't. Her rifle, a Mark 22 MRAD in .300 Norma Magnum, lay motionless against her shoulder. She'd zeroed it at 800 meters before insertion. Current conditions required a mental adjustment. The ash-laden air was denser than standard atmosphere, which meant slight bullet deceleration at range. Maybe 3 inches of drift at 600 meters if the wind held. The wind was not holding. She tracked left, tracked right. Nothing moved in the town below except the ash. She keyed her radio. "Hawk, you copy?" Static, then, "Copy, Maddox. Comms are degraded. Ash is clogging the antenna mesh." The voice was graveled and unhurried. The voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that urgency over the radio was contagious in the wrong direction. Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Brennan, retired, now listed on her mission brief as Civilian Contractor Advisor, Autonomous Systems Division. She'd known him as something simpler, the man who had taught her to shoot. "SIGINT still showing militia presence in Grid Charlie 7? She asked. "Affirm. 3 heat signatures last confirmed 2 hours ago. Moving slow. Either they're being careful or they're hurt. Or SIGINT is wrong." A pause. Also possible. That was Hawk. He never told her what she wanted to hear. It was the first thing she'd respected about him, back at sniper school at Fort Benning, when she was 23 years old and certain she knew more than any 50-something instructor who hadn't deployed in a decade. He disabused her of that certainty in about 48 hours. Not through authority, through patience. He waited for her to make mistakes. Then he explained, quietly and without mockery, exactly why she'd made them. She'd graduated top of her class. She still wasn't sure how much of that was her and how much was him. Primary objective remains the same, Hawk said. The Ares 7 autonomous defense grid has been operating outside sanctioned parameters for 72 hours. 4 turret units, 2 mobile Sentinel drones. Mission is to disable or destroy all active units and recover the control module for forensic analysis. And the civilians should not be there. Exclusion order covers the entire restricted boundary. Should not be there and are not there are different things, Hawk. Another pause. Longer this time. Affirm. Claire filed that away and said nothing more about it. The ash came in waves. Every 20 minutes or so, the wind off the caldera would shift and push a fresh curtain of particulate across the ridge. Claire had learned to time her observation windows between waves. She'd also learned to keep her mouth covered. She'd swallowed enough volcanic ash in the first hour to make her throat feel like she'd been gargling gravel. Her kit was stripped for mobility. 200 rounds of .300 Norma Magnum in 4 magazines. 1 suppressor. A Glock 19 as backup. Emergency trauma pack. 48 hours of water and rations. She'd left the night vision monocular at the FOB. The thermal distortion from residual geothermal venting made it useless here. The landscape radiated heat in false patterns. Rocks that looked cold were warm. Ground that looked stable shimmered like water in the late afternoon light. She'd deployed alone by choice. Hawk had offered a spotter. She'd said no. A spotter would be another variable. Another person to protect if things went wrong. Another throat to clear. Another boot to shift. Another heartbeat that could transmit through the ground to a thermal sensor at the wrong moment. The last time she'd worked with a spotter in complex terrain, a civilian truck convoy had driven into her field of fire during a follow-on engagement in Kandahar province. Her spotter had confirmed hostile movement. She had taken the shot. The spotter had been wrong. She had been wrong. 3 civilians, a man, his wife, his teenage son, all dead before the truck stopped rolling. The official investigation cleared her, declared it a lawful engagement under prevailing rules. Fog of war, insufficient intelligence. Standard Army language for the part where a family disappears and the paperwork moves on. Claire did not move on. She thought about it every time she laid eyes on a civilian vehicle within 3 miles of a weapon system. She thought about it whenever command told her the target area was clear. She thought about it now, staring at a town that was supposedly empty, watching the ash settle on rooftops that should have had no one under them. Movement. She stopped breathing. Southwest corner of the settlement, behind the collapsed feed store on what used to be Main Street. A shape, no, 2 shapes, moving with the careful, hunched gait of people trying very hard not to be seen. Civilian clothing, no tactical gear. One of them was small, child-sized. Hawk, she kept her voice flat. I have visual on 2 personnel, southwest quadrant. Civilian profile, 1 adult, 1 minor. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Say again? You heard me. That's not possible. The exclusion order. I'm looking at them through a 12-power scope, Hawk. They're real. Another pause. She could hear him working the problem, the same way he'd always worked problems, methodically, without panic, ruling out each wrong answer until only the right one remained. Could be squatters, he said finally. Zone's been restricted for 18 months, but enforcement has been inconsistent. Some families from the original logging community have been trying to reclaim property through the courts. There were reports of unauthorized returns last spring. They're moving toward the eastern perimeter, toward the grid. How far from the nearest Ares unit? Claire tracked right, found the turret she'd been watching since hour 2. It sat on a fabricated platform bolted to the remnant of a water tower on the northern edge of town. A squat, cylindrical housing mounted on a rotating base, twin barrels of a 7.62 NATO minigun configuration, flanked by an additional targeting sensor cluster. The design was unfamiliar to her. She'd read the Ares 7 program specs on the flight in. The hardware in front of her didn't match them exactly. That had been bothering her since she arrived. 800 meters, she said, maybe less. Stay on them. Do not engage the civilians. Do not engage the grid unless you have a clean shot on a unit that presents immediate lethal threat. And if the grid presents threat to the civilians? Hawk's voice shifted, barely, but she heard it. A fraction of hesitation that wasn't like him. We'll cross that when we get there. An hour later, the drone appeared. She heard it before she saw it. A high-pitched whine cutting through the wind, then a visible profile emerging from the ash curtain to the north. Hexagonal frame, 6 rotors, approximately 18 inches across. Standard recon configuration, she thought initially. Then she saw the payload housing underneath. Not a camera, a targeting system. The drone swept the eastern sector in a grid pattern, moving with the precise, unhurried efficiency of automated search. It was not searching randomly. It was clearing sectors in sequence, working toward the 2 civilians she'd been tracking. Hawk, the drone is actively searching. It's not recon. It has a weapons payload. Copy. His voice was tight now. Ares 7 is rated autonomous only within designated engagement zones. The eastern perimeter should be outside its engagement boundary. The drone stopped. It hovered for exactly 3 seconds over an open patch of ash-covered ground east of the feed store. Then it descended to roughly 30 meters altitude and held position. It's acquired something, Claire said. The 2 civilians had stopped moving. She could see them through the scope, pressed against the wall of a partially standing structure, a garage or workshop. The adult had pulled the child close. Neither of them was moving. The drone was still facing them. I have a shot on the drone, Claire said. Rotors are exposed at this angle. Negative. Do not engage. We don't know if taking down a drone unit will trigger a defensive response from the turrets. Hawk, it's targeting civilians. We don't know that. It could be running an identification protocol. And if the identification protocol ends with a weapons engagement? The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 7. Then you engage, Hawk said quietly. Use your judgment, Maddox. The drone fired. A single burst. Short, controlled, devastating. Not at the civilians. At a shape Claire hadn't noticed, pressed against the east wall of an adjacent structure. A figure she'd misread as debris in the gray light. A body now. She didn't know if it had been a person or something else. She didn't have time to process it. The 2 civilians broke from cover and ran, northeast, directly toward the main cluster of Ares units. They're running, Claire said. Wrong direction. Can you stop them? Not without exposing my position. Then track them and find me an opening. She tracked them. The wind died. For about 90 seconds, the ash curtain thinned to near transparency, and Claire could see the full layout of the town in flat, gray light. She used the window. 4 visible turret positions, the drone banking north, 2 mobile ground units, squat, treaded platforms about the size of riding mowers, parked in what used to be the town square. The ground units were new. They weren't in the Ares 7 spec sheet at all. She photographed what she could through the scope's data link adapter and pushed the images to Hawk's uplink. You seeing this? She asked. Getting it now. A pause, then quieter. Those ground platforms aren't Ares 7. That's a different system entirely. Recognized? Partially. There's a contractor prototype, Sentinel Dynamics, out of Reston, Virginia, in advanced field testing. I didn't know it had progressed this far. How far is this far? Autonomous engagement, integrated fire control, no human in the loop requirement. Claire held that in her head for a moment. She thought about the firing solution she'd run on the first drone. She thought about the body against the east wall. She thought about the civilian evacuation truck on Route 504 that she'd watched arrive on the access road 20 minutes before insertion. The white sheets tied to the mirrors, the careful, slow speed of a vehicle projecting absolute non-threat. Hawk, that truck on the 504 access road, where is it now? Keyboard movement, then silence. Hawk, I'm looking. She swept her scope south, found the road. The truck was still on it, still moving slow. Almost at the edge of town now, where the road bent around a collapsed overpass and passed within 400 meters of the northern turret cluster. She ran the geometry. The turret had a clear line of sight. Hawk, that truck is going to come into engagement range of the northern cluster in approximately 90 seconds. I see it. Command is working on a stand-down signal? They're working on it. She watched the truck. She watched the turret. The wind shifted back. Ash thickened. She compensated on the scope. Her crosshairs found the sensor cluster on top of the turret housing, the most efficient point of mechanical failure. One round through the optics assembly and the targeting system went blind. She had the shot. She did not have authorization. 60 seconds, she said. Command is still 50. Maddox, Hawk, I have a clean shot. Give me authorization. The turret began to rotate. Authorization is not my call, he said. You know that. She knew that. She took the shot anyway. The round hit the sensor cluster at 387 meters. The turret housing shuddered. The rotation stopped. The targeting assembly swung loose on its mount, pointing nowhere. The truck rolled through the engagement window and kept moving. Claire worked the bolt, ejected the casing, kept her eye on the scope. Nobody fired at her. She waited 30 seconds, a full minute, then she keyed the radio. Northern turret is down. Truck is clear. Hawk's voice came back dry and even. You were never here, Maddox. I know. That shot was never fired. I know, Hawk. Good. A beat. Good shooting. She was changing firing positions, moving 30 meters northeast to a secondary hide when she heard the frequency. It came through her radio on a channel she wasn't monitoring. She'd set up passive scanning across the tactical spectrum as standard practice, and now the scanner flagged a burst transmission on an encrypted contractor band. Not military standard, not militia, something in between. The encryption was partial. The system was still key exchanging, which meant the first few seconds were readable before the cipher locked. She pulled the earpiece tight and listened. Live fire window is active. Repeat, live fire window is active. All Sentinel units are greenlit for autonomous engagement. Classification of mobile elements in exclusion zone as non-compliant. Confirm receipt. A pause. Then a different voice, colder, formal. Received. Sentinel 1 through 4 confirm greenlit. Ares 7 integration running parallel engagement protocol. Estimate 47 minutes to full sector clearance. The channel locked. The cipher closed. Claire lay very still. Non-compliant. The word was doing heavy lifting. It was covering the civilian adult and the child pressed against the workshop wall. It was covering the evacuation truck with white sheets on the mirrors. It was covering whatever body had been slumped against the east wall before the drone fired. She had been briefed to assume the Ares 7 system had been seized by rogue militia, that her mission was to recover hardware turned against U.S. interests. She had been told the wrong story. The system wasn't captured. The system was running exactly as designed. The live fire window was authorized. The civilians in the exclusion zone weren't incidental complications. They were designated targets. She keyed her radio. Hawk, did you copy that transmission? Negative. What frequency? She gave him the band. Long silence. That's a contractor partition. I don't have read access. I do now. Hawk, the Ares 7 isn't captured. It's being operated, deliberately, inside the exclusion zone, with civilians present. She listened to him breathe. The live fire window, he said. How long? 47 minutes. Probably 45 now. Another silence. This one felt heavier, like he was carrying something he'd been carrying for a while and had just been asked to set it down in front of her. Hawk, her voice was steady. She kept it steady. Did you know? I suspected, he said, that the escalation parameters were broader than the brief indicated. I did not know the civilian classification. That's a careful answer. It's the honest one. She thought about that for 3 seconds. Then she stopped thinking about it because thinking about it required time she didn't have. 45 minutes, 4 turret units, 2 mobile sentinel platforms, 1 drone. And now, from somewhere in the gray ash-filtered light to the northeast, her passive scanner was picking up something else. Not a transmission, a laser rangefinder pulse. Brief, precise, professional, pointed at her position. She didn't move. Moving was the wrong answer. The pulse had been single shot, not the sustained pattern of automated targeting. Automated systems strobed. A human operator used one clean pulse to establish range, then relied on position memory. Whoever was holding that rangefinder was disciplined enough not to follow up. Professional. She let 5 seconds pass, then 10. She shifted her weight by increments, not repositioning, just settling, making herself look like a fixed element of the terrain to any thermal system scanning the ridge. She ran the geometry backward. The pulse had come from the northeast, elevation approximately equal to hers. The collapsed radio tower on the far ridge would give a clear sightline to her position, but it was also the obvious choice. Professionals didn't use the obvious choice unless they wanted to be found. Debris field east of the tower then, broken concrete and rebar from a pre-eruption construction project that had never been completed. Good cover. Multiple firing positions. Easy movement between them without silhouette exposure. She filed it away and did not look directly at it. Hawk, she said quietly, I have a second shooter in the AO. Militia? She thought about the rangefinder pulse, the discipline, the single-shot technique. No. Contractor security? If Sentinel Dynamics has a live-fire operation running, possibly, she paused, or something else. She swept the debris field without settling her crosshairs, looking for disturbed ash, looking for a shadow that didn't fit its surroundings, looking for the small signs, displaced rock, warm breath against cold air, that a trained shooter left despite every effort to leave nothing. She found one, a column of thermal shimmer 6 inches above a concrete slab in the debris field. Too narrow to be geothermal, too consistent to be wind effect. Breath mist. Somebody exhaling slowly and trying very hard to control it. Good position, good discipline. But the ash was doing what ash always did in cold air, catching breath vapor and holding it a fraction of a second longer than it should. She had a position. She did not have a profile. She did not have an identity. She filed that away too. I'm moving to secondary hide, she told Hawk. Cover my transition. You're already covered. She moved. The secondary hide was in a basement-level window frame of a collapsed residential structure. One of the original logging community homes, pre-1980, the upper 2 floors pancaked into rubble. The window frame faced northeast, which was a problem, but the angle to the lava tube settlement was better from here, and the debris ceiling above her provided thermal masking that her rooftop position hadn't. She settled in. 40 minutes remaining. 4 Ares units to disable. 2 Sentinel ground platforms. 1 drone. 200 rounds in 1 rifle. A second shooter of unknown allegiance. 2 civilians moving toward the worst possible position. Hawk on a degraded radio link running partial intelligence from a contractor network he didn't have full access to. She had seen worse situations than this. She tried to remember when. Talk to me about the Sentinel ground units, she said. Control architecture. They run off a central uplink relay, Hawk said. If you can locate the relay antenna, you can disrupt the engagement protocol for all Sentinel units simultaneously. The Ares 7 turrets have independent targeting, but Sentinel was designed with centralized command architecture. Cost efficiency. Where's the relay? Unknown. Elevated, for line-of-sight uplink. Probably co-located with a Sentinel unit. She swept the town square. The two ground platforms were still parked in the same position. One of them had an antenna array on its chassis, 3 thin rods elevated about 18 inches above the main body. She hadn't registered it as significant before. She registered it now. I think one of the Sentinel platforms is carrying the relay. Can you hit it from your current position? If it stays where it is, but the moment I start shooting, every unit in the grid reorients. Then you need to sequence, prioritize. I know how to prioritize, Hawk. I know you do. A pause. Claire, he almost never used her first name. Be careful about the second shooter. If they're contractor security, they have lethal authorization in this zone. You're in the exclusion zone without Sentinel Dynamics clearance. In their legal framework, I know what I am in their legal framework. Then be careful. I will. She ran the scope across the debris field one more time. Nothing had shifted. The shimmer was still there, barely visible. But I'm not going to wait for their stand-down signal, Hawk. If it comes, great. If it doesn't, I know, he said. I didn't expect you to wait. She checked her round count. She ran the sequence in her head. She looked at the ash-gray town below her and the 40 minutes left on a clock that nobody above her pay grade was going to stop. Then she began. The ash storm hit without warning. One moment the air was gray and manageable, visibility at 200 meters, enough to work with. The next, the wind off the caldera reversed direction and drove a wall of particulate across the ridge like a horizontal blizzard. Visibility collapsed to 50 meters, then 30. The world outside her window frame became a uniform, gray-white void. Claire pulled her balaclava up over her nose and pressed her eye against the scope's rubber eye cup. The optics were useless now. She could see nothing but swirling ash. She kept the rifle up anyway. Muscle memory. In zero visibility, you held your position and you held your weapon and you waited, because the storm would pass or it wouldn't. And either way, there was nothing to do about it. She used the time to think. The live fire window had 43 minutes left. No, less. She'd spent time moving to the secondary hide. Call it 38 minutes. The ash storm would eat some of that. It would also cover her movements, which was something. The second shooter was the immediate problem. She didn't know his mission parameters. She didn't know if he was contractor security running a standard perimeter watch or something more specific. The single rangefinder pulse suggested observation rather than active engagement. If he'd wanted her dead, the cleaner move would have been to take the shot the moment he acquired her, not range her and wait. Which meant either he was evaluating her or he had instructions that didn't begin with immediate elimination. She didn't find either possibility comforting. "Storm is blinding me," she told Hawk. "What's your SIGINT showing?" "Thermal feeds are degraded. Geothermal interference is spiking with the wind shift. It's creating false signatures across the whole sector." A pause. "I'm losing confidence in everything I'm looking at." "What about the civilians?" Last confirmed position was inside the workshop structure, southeast corner. They hadn't moved for 11 minutes before the storm hit. If they're smart, they're staying put. They're not professionals. They don't know to stay put. "No," Hawk said, "they don't." The wind howled across the window frame and drove a fresh wave of particulate against her face. She tasted sulfur. The smell was stronger now. The storm was pulling air from somewhere deeper in the volcanic system, somewhere that still had active heat below the surface. The ground beneath her position transmitted a faint vibration. Not seismic exactly, more like a very deep, very slow pulse. She'd felt something similar in her first week in the zone. The ranger station supervisor, before the exclusion order, before the station was abandoned, had told her it was normal. The mountain breathed, he'd said. You learn to live with it. She was learning to live with a lot of things right now. The storm began to ease after 7 minutes. Visibility crept back, 30 meters, 50, 80. The landscape emerged from the gray-white void by degrees, resolving back into its familiar palette of ash and dark volcanic rock and the skeletal outlines of abandoned buildings. Claire swept the scope left to right, the town square first. Both Sentinel ground platforms were still in position. Neither had moved during the storm, which suggested their navigation systems weren't calibrated for low-visibility operations. Useful information if she needed to use the next storm as cover. She swept right, toward the debris field. The shimmer above the concrete slab was gone. The second shooter had moved. She ran the angles. From the concrete slab position, the second shooter had 3 natural movement options: northeast along the debris field toward the lava tube ridge, southwest back toward the access road, or directly south into the abandoned town. Northeast would give him better elevation and a wider field of fire, the professional choice if his mission was observation. Southwest was retreat. South was aggressive. She watched for microsigns: disturbed ash, movement against the wind direction, the faint compression marks that boot soles left in deep ash if you looked at the right angle, in the right light. There, 30 meters south of the original slab position, a slight track, not footprints exactly, more like a series of subtle depressions where ash had been displaced and then partially refilled by the storm, moving south, into the town, toward the civilians. Hawk, the second shooter, is moving toward the settlement, heading south toward the lava tube structures. That's where the civilians last were. I know. Could be coincidence. Could be he's tracking the autonomous units. Could be a lot of things. She was already calculating egress from her current position. The window frame gave her excellent concealment but poor lateral mobility. She'd have to back out the way she came in, which meant 15 seconds of exposure to anyone watching from the northeast. I'm moving. I need to get ahead of him. You'll expose yourself to the Ares units. One problem at a time. Claire, Hawk, one problem at a time. She backed out of the window frame slowly, keeping her profile below the rubble line. The debris ceiling above her groaned, ash weight probably, or the same deep pulse she'd been feeling in the ground. She ignored it. She worked her way along the back wall of the collapsed structure, found the gap she'd marked on entry, and slipped through it into the narrow alley between 2 building footprints. The alley gave her concealment from the north. She moved south at a crouch, rifle up, clearing each doorway and gap as she passed. The ash was deep here, 4 inches on flat surfaces, deeper where it had drifted against walls. Her boots made almost no sound. Small mercies. She reached the corner of the last intact building on the northern edge of town, a single-story commercial structure that had been a hardware store, according to the pre-exclusion survey maps. From here, she had a view across the open ground of the town square, the 2 Sentinel platforms clearly visible at 200 meters, and beyond them, the lava tube settlement, a cluster of 3 squat concrete structures built into the slope above the old town boundary, half buried in volcanic debris. That was where the civilians were. That was where the second shooter was heading. She needed to get there first. She looked at the open ground between her and the settlement, 200 meters of exposed ash flat with no cover. The Sentinel platforms would have clear lines of sight across that ground. Their targeting systems would be running, degraded by the storm interference probably, but not blind. She had maybe 30 seconds to cross before a Sentinel unit reacquired normal operating parameters. She ran. The Sentinel platform on the left began to rotate when she was halfway across. She didn't stop. Stopping was dying. She ran harder, pushing through the deep ash, her boots punching through the surface with each stride, the rifle banging against her shoulder strap. The platform's sensor array tracked left, tracking her movement. She could see the optics assembly swiveling, the integrated targeting pods cycling through its acquisition sequence. She hit the slope of the lava tube settlement at full sprint and went flat behind a concrete embankment. The sentinel fired. A burst of 5.56, short, automatic, chewed the volcanic rock face 3 feet above her head. Close enough that she heard the ricochet whine past her ear. She pressed herself against the base of the embankment and breathed. The platform fired again. This time higher, it had lost her position behind the embankment and was walking rounds up the slope, searching. The shots went wide. The firing stopped. She waited 10 seconds, 15. Then she raised her head just enough to look. The platform had stopped moving. Its sensor array was still pointed in her general direction, but the targeting pod had cycled back to a neutral scan pattern. Lost acquisition. The geothermal interference must still be affecting its targeting resolution at close range. She had a window, small. She used it. She was over the embankment and through the low entrance of the nearest concrete structure before the platform completed its next scan cycle. She was inside. The structure smelled of old concrete and ash and something else. Wood smoke. Recent. Someone had built a fire in here. Not long ago. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness. The space was about 30 feet square, a storage bunker by the look of it, pre-eruption construction. The walls were poured concrete, 18 inches thick. The ceiling was intact. There were pallets along one wall stacked with supply containers, food by the labeling, commercial camping rations, a water filtration system, a folding camp table with a battery lantern, currently off, and a handheld radio, currently off. Somebody had been living here, not just sheltering, living for a while. She swept the room, nobody present. She found the second entrance, a low tunnel cut into the back wall, partially blocked by a rusted equipment locker. Recent movement around the locker. Ash disturbed at the threshold. The civilians had gone through here. She keyed her radio, kept her voice low. Hawk. I'm inside the lava tube settlement, northeast bunker. Civilians have been living here. There are supplies, looks like weeks of provisions. That explains how they got inside the exclusion zone. His voice had a new quality now, something careful and controlled. Claire, I have something. What? I've been working the contractor partition. I can't break the encryption, but I found a metadata trail. The live fire test has been running for 6 days. The system has already made 17 autonomous engagements inside the exclusion zone. She held very still. 17. Confirmed. The non-compliant elements classification covers anyone who entered the zone without Sentinel Dynamics clearance. That includes 3 separate groups that entered through the northern boundary over the past week. The contractor logs show them as resolved. Resolved. Another word doing heavy lifting. The civilians I'm tracking, she said. How long have they been in the zone? Based on the supply cache you're describing, at least 3 weeks. Before the live fire window opened? Yes, they were here when the window activated, which means they were reclassified retroactively. She thought about a family. She was assuming family, parent and child, though she didn't know for certain, who had come back to reclaim their home, or their land, or just to see what was left. 3 weeks of careful, quiet living in a concrete bunker with commercial rations and a water filter, thinking the worst thing they faced was a federal exclusion violation. And then the machines started moving. Hawk, I'm going after them. The tunnel leads toward the active lava tube system. The Category 3 instability sites are in that sector. I know. If the ground shifts while you're in there, I know, Hawk. A pause. Copy. I'll keep monitoring the contractor frequency. And Claire, he stopped. What? Be careful about the tunnel structure. The geological survey flags subsurface voids in that section. The floor may not be what it looks like. She looked at the tunnel entrance. at the ash disturbed around the equipment locker. Understood, she said. She went through. The tunnel was narrow and low. She moved through it at a crouch, rifle angled down to keep the barrel from catching on the ceiling. The concrete gave way to raw volcanic rock after about 20 meters, the tunnel walls shifting from poured construction to something more ancient. A natural lava tube that the bunker builders had incorporated into their structure and then partially reinforced with timber framing. The framing was old. Some of it had failed. She moved carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. The floor was dry volcanic rock, porous and uneven, with long stretches of solidified lava flow that had cooled in rippled patterns decades before she was born. Underfoot, it felt like walking on the surface of a frozen wave. Her boots found purchase mostly. The smell of sulfur was stronger in here. Light ahead, not artificial light, but a diffuse gray-white glow from somewhere beyond a bend in the tunnel. She moved toward it and found a crack in the tunnel ceiling, 6 inches wide and several feet long, through which ash-filtered daylight fell in a pale column. On the floor beneath it, 2 sets of footprints in a thin ash deposit. Adult and child. Headed deeper. She followed. The tunnel bent twice more and then opened into a natural cavity, a lava tube chamber roughly 40 feet across and 20 feet high, the ceiling arched and smooth where the ancient lava flow had pulled away from the rock above it. The floor was relatively flat. The chamber had 2 other exits, one low tunnel to the east, one wider passage to the north. In the center of the chamber, pressed against the western wall, were the civilians. The adult was a woman, mid-30s. Claire revised her estimate now that she could see her clearly. Younger than she'd initially thought, but aged by the last week or 2. Dark circles under her eyes, her face tight with the particular exhaustion of sustained fear. She was wearing layered civilian clothing, flannel, insulated vest, work boots. Practical. She'd prepared for this. The child was a girl, 8, maybe 9 years old. She had the same dark eyes as the woman. Her face was doing something children's faces did in these situations. Flattening, withdrawing, managing fear by putting it somewhere interior and quiet. She was doing a better job of it than most adults Claire had seen. The woman raised something when Claire came through the tunnel, a flare gun. Claire kept her hands visible and her rifle angled down. "Easy, I'm U.S. Army." The woman didn't lower the flare gun. Her hand was shaking, but her grip was solid. "You were shooting up there." "One of the turrets, I took it down. Those things have been..." The woman's voice broke, then steadied. "They've been hunting us. For 2 days. Every time we move above ground, they find us." "I know, I'm working to shut them down." There were other people in the zone. When the machine started, the woman's eyes went somewhere else for a moment. Not unfocused exactly, but looking at something internal that Claire understood was not something she wanted to see. "We heard shooting 6 days ago, then nothing." The 17 resolved engagements. Some of those had been people this woman had heard die. "What's your name?" Claire asked. Sarah Tillman." A fractional hesitation. "This is my daughter, Mia." "I'm Claire." She kept her voice level. Calm, the way Hawk had taught her to be calm. Not performed calm, but actual stillness. Because animals and children and people in shock responded to actual stillness and saw through performed calm every time. "Sarah, I need you to stay in this chamber. Don't move toward either exit until I come back for you. Can you do that? You're going to stop them? All of them?" "I'm going to try." The girl, Mia, was looking at her rifle. Not with fear exactly, with the focused, evaluating attention of a child who had been living in close proximity to danger long enough to have developed opinions about what was dangerous and what wasn't. "Is that enough?" Mia asked, meaning the rifle. "It's enough," Claire said. It might not be enough, but it was what she had. She went back through the tunnel. She came out of the bunker into a changed situation. The first Sentinel ground platform had moved. It was no longer in the town square. It had advanced to the edge of the settlement slope. Its sensor array pointed directly at the bunker entrance she just exited. The second platform was still in the square, but its orientation had shifted. The drone was airborne again, circling the settlement at about 50 meters altitude. The system was hurting. It had tracked her entry into the bunker and was now positioning to prevent exit. The platforms were not shooting, not yet, but the geometry of their positions was precise and deliberate. They were boxing in the settlement from two angles, with the drone providing the third. Anyone exiting from the primary entrance would be in a three-way crossfire. She crouched behind the concrete embankment and took stock. 31 minutes left on the live fire window. 3 Ares turrets still operational. She'd taken down the northern one, but the other 3 were still active and would reorient to any engagement sound. 2 Sentinel platforms, 1 drone. The relay antenna on the forward Sentinel unit was now clearly visible at 180 meters, close enough for a clean shot, close enough that the platforms would be on her before she could work the bolt for a follow-up. She keyed her radio. "Hawk, the Sentinel units have moved. They're boxing in the settlement." "Herding protocol," he said immediately. "I've been reading the Sentinel operational specs. When the system identifies a target cluster in a fixed structure, it activates a containment sequence before final engagement. It's designed to prevent exfiltration. Gives the system time to—" He stopped. "Gives the system time to what, Hawk?" "To confirm targeting parameters. Make sure all elements are inside the engagement zone before the final sequence activates." "Final sequence. How long does the containment protocol run?" "Unknown. The specs I have are incomplete." "Best estimate." A pause. "Based on the system architecture, I'd say between 15 and 30 minutes. It needs a clear acquisition window on all identified elements before it initiates." 15 to 30 minutes. The live fire window had 31 minutes left. If the containment protocol ran to the high end of that estimate, the timing would be very close. "Talk to me about the relay shot," she said. "If I take out the antenna on the forward Sentinel, what happens to the Ares turrets?" "Ares runs independent. Taking down Sentinel's relay doesn't stop Ares, but it freezes the Sentinel platforms in the drone. They lose their coordination protocol and default to a standby state. And then I have the Ares turrets to deal with. One at a time, yes. With manual targeting and no coordination network, they're still dangerous, but they can't flank you." She thought about the geometry. The relay antenna at 180. After the shot, she'd have maybe 8 seconds before the remaining Ares units reacquired her position. She needed a second firing position ready, somewhere that gave her angles on the remaining turrets without putting her back to the mobile platforms. There was a water cistern on the southeast corner of the settlement slope, a concrete structure about 4 feet tall that would give her cover and elevation. She'd marked it on approach. From there, she could engage 2 of the remaining Ares turrets with clear sightlines. The third turret was on the west side of town. She couldn't engage it from the cistern without full exposure. One problem at a time. She had 30 rounds in her current magazine. She needed the relay shot, then at minimum 4 rounds per turret, 2 to confirm target, 2 for the sensor kill. That was 12 rounds for 3 turrets, plus whatever the second shooter threw into the equation. The second shooter. She hadn't tracked him since entering the bunker. He'd been moving south when she lost him. That put him somewhere in the settlement area right now, above her, below her, or somewhere to the side of her current position. "Hawk," she said, "I've lost track of the second shooter. Can you give me anything?" "Thermal is still degraded. I'm getting false positives every 20 meters from the geothermal venting." A pause. "He could be anywhere in the settlement zone." "Helpful." "I know. I'm sorry." Another pause, longer. "Claire, there's something I need to tell you." His voice had changed. The controlled, methodical quality was still there, but underneath it was something she hadn't heard from him in 6 years. Since the night she'd called him from Kandahar, after the investigation cleared her, and he'd sat on the phone for 3 hours and said almost nothing, and she'd understood that saying almost nothing was exactly what she'd needed. "Say it," she said. "The black-level containment team I mentioned. The response protocol for unauthorized military presence." He stopped, started again. "I've been in the contractor partition for the last hour. The containment authorization doesn't just cover civilians in the zone. It covers any U.S. military personnel who have observed the live-fire operation without clearance." She held that in her head. "How broad is the authorization?" "Lethal. Full sanction, no reporting requirement, no accountability trail." A beat. "The second shooter isn't contractor security. He's the containment team. He's here for you, Claire, specifically." The tunnel in the lava chamber, the breath mist above the concrete slab, the single, disciplined rangefinder pulse, not observation, assessment. He'd been evaluating whether to take her then or wait for a better moment. "When did you know?" she asked. "I suspected when you reported the rangefinder pulse. I confirmed it 12 minutes ago from the contractor manifest." A pause. "I should have told you immediately. I was still trying to find a way to reach the stand-down authority." "And?" "There isn't one. The authorization was signed at a level above anything I have access to. I've been working it for the last hour, and I've hit nothing but walls." His voice went quieter. "The stand-down signal isn't coming, Claire. Nobody above us is going to stop this. It's you. Whatever you do in the next 30 minutes, that's all there is." She leaned against the concrete embankment. The ground pulse moved through her again, that deep, slow vibration from somewhere far below. The mountain, breathing. She thought about Hawk's voice 6 years ago, sitting on a satellite phone in Kandahar, saying almost nothing. She thought about what it meant that he'd called himself a contractor advisor on the mission brief and never mentioned the contractor partition that apparently implicated him in whatever Sentinel Dynamics was doing out here. She thought about whether that made him complicit or navigating, and she decided that right now she didn't have time to determine which. "Hawk," she said, "keep trying." "I will. And if you can't," she stopped. "If I can't, then you know what I'm going to do." A very long pause. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I do." She was running a final mental rehearsal of the relay shot when the radio crackled with something unexpected. A voice. Not Hawk's, not the contractor frequency, open band, clear channel, male voice, flat affect, professional. "Stand down, Sergeant." She didn't respond. "You're identified. I have your position, your exfil window, and your comms link." A pause. "I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm telling you there's a version of this where you go home. Stand down from the Ares engagement, exit the settlement zone through the northwest corridor, and your involvement ends here." She kept her eye on the relay antenna. 180, wind at 7 knots, left to right, but steady now. The ash storm had passed and the air was as stable as it was going to get. "And the civilians?" she said. Silence. "The 2 people in the lava tube bunker," she said. "Woman named Sarah Tillman, her daughter Mia. What happens to them?" More silence, longer this time. "That's not my call," he said finally. "Whose call is it?" "The system's." She held that. The system's call. No human in the loop. No accountability trail. No reporting requirement. A contractor live fire test classifying a mother and her 9-year-old daughter as non-compliant elements. And the cleanup asset on the other end of the radio telling her it wasn't his call because he'd outsourced his conscience to the software. "I'm going to destroy the relay," she said. "If you fire that rifle, I will engage." "I know." A pause. Something shifted in his voice, barely, but she heard it. A quality that wasn't in his first transmission. Something that might have been, in a different context, reluctance. "You know I'm better at this than you think I am," he said. Probably, she said, but I'm better at this than you think I am too. She settled the crosshairs on the antenna array. The system's call. She fired. The relay antenna disintegrated at 180 meters. She was already moving before the round hit, rolling left off the embankment, coming up in a low sprint toward the water cistern, 50 meters on the diagonal. Behind her, she heard the Sentinel platform's targeting system cycling, trying to reacquire, but the relay shot had done exactly what Hawk said it would. The platform's coordination protocol had severed, and without it, the targeting system was running a slower, less coherent search pattern. She hit the cistern and went flat against the east face. A shot cracked from the northeast. Rock exploded off the cistern's top edge, 6 inches above her head. Close, very close. The second shooter had been positioned higher than she'd estimated, above the debris field on the Lava 2 bridge. Better elevation, better angle. She pressed herself against the concrete. He knew where she was. He had elevation. She had cover, and she had 31 rounds remaining, but she was pinned. The Ares turrets. If she stayed pinned against the cistern, she had maybe a minute before one of the remaining 3 Ares units walked its fire around her cover. The autonomous targeting systems were running independent now. No relay coordination, but still active, still scanning. She just made herself a high-priority target by firing on the Sentinel relay. Another crack from the ridge. This one hit the ground 2 feet to her right. A range adjustment. He was walking shots in. She had to move. She had to move and engage the Ares units and deal with the second shooter simultaneously, which was not a thing a single person was designed to do, which was why snipers always worked in pairs, which was why she'd refused a spotter, which felt like a very relevant regret right now. She keyed her radio. "Hawk, I'm pinned at the cistern. Second shooter has elevation on the ridge. Ares units are still active. Talk to me." "I'm looking at the Ares positioning. The 2 eastern turrets have line of sight to your current position. The western turret does not. The settlement slope blocks its angle." "Can I reach the western slope from the cistern's north face without exposing myself to the eastern turrets?" "Possibly. There's a debris line running northeast from your position. If you can reach it, it provides partial defilade from the eastern units. The second shooter loses your silhouette below the ridgeline if you move north-northeast." She looked at the debris line, 20 meters, across open ash flat. Another shot from the ridge. Wide this time. Wind shift, she thought, or impatience. Impatience was interesting. Impatience meant he was working a timeline. "He has a hard exfil window," she said aloud. "He's not trying to wait me out. He needs this finished before the live fire window closes," Hawk finished. "If the live fire window closes without completing the containment protocol, there's an investigation. Documentation. He needs clean resolution before the window ends." "How long left?" 22 minutes, Hawk said before she asked. 22 minutes. She looked at the 20 meters of open ground. She pushed off the cistern and ran. He fired twice while she was in the open. First shot hit ash 2 feet left. Second shot closer. She felt the pressure wave of it, which meant the round had passed within inches. But she was moving at an angle to his position, and she was fast, and she was not running in a straight line. And the ground dropped away from her as she crossed into the debris field's northern shadow, and he lost her silhouette. She went flat in the debris, ash in her face, in her eyes. She wiped them clear and came up with the scope. Eastern turret, 140 meters. The sensor cluster was swiveling toward her. Acquisition in progress. She put a round through the optics assembly before it completed the cycle. The turret shuddered. The sensor cluster sagged. She worked the bolt. Second eastern turret, 190 meters, slightly behind the first, which meant she had a second or two before it acquired. She took it. The round punched through the targeting housing, and the turret went dead. 2 eastern turrets down. She was already moving again, working north along the debris field. angling toward the western slope where the 3rd Ares unit held position. The second shooter's angle to her was getting worse as she moved north. She could see his rough position on the ridge, the slight depression in the ash line where he'd been lying, and from where she was now, the settlement structures were beginning to cut into his sightline. She was getting close to the ridge approach, close enough that she could see something she hadn't been able to see before. The Ares control antenna, not the Sentinel relay, that was gone. This was the Ares 7 master control antenna, the uplink tower she'd noted during the brief, the one that Hawk had identified as the system's coordination hub. It was on the far side of the western turret cluster, bolted to a standing section of the old fire lookout tower near the zone's northern boundary. 1,200 meters from her current position. 1,200 meters. Wind variable. Thermal distortion moderate. The geothermal interference would affect the round at range, adding unpredictability in the final 300 meters. The shot was possible. The shot was difficult. The shot was the kind of shot that ended everything. All 4 Ares units, every autonomous engagement protocol, the entire live fire window, terminated from a single well-placed round through the antenna housing. And if the antenna tower was sitting above an unstable lava tube, which the geological survey suggested it might be, the secondary explosion from the transmitter hardware could trigger a collapse, which might bring down the ridge section, which might take out the second shooter's position, which might also take out her escape route. She filed that under problems to solve in sequence and continued moving. She found him first. She came around the north face of the settlement slope, and there he was, 40 meters ahead, crouched behind a broken lava flow shelf, his rifle angled down toward the settlement. He was watching the bunker entrance. He hadn't seen her come around the slope. He'd expected her to stay in the debris field. She had him cold. Clean shot. She could end it right here. She didn't. She kept moving. Closed to 20 meters. 15. Used the volcanic rock for cover and moved the way Hawk had taught her to move. Weight transfer, heel to toe, slow enough that the ash didn't crunch. 10 meters. She stepped on a shard of cooled lava that cracked like a gunshot. He spun, rifle up. Fast, very fast, faster than she'd expected. She was already inside his muzzle. She swept the barrel aside with her left forearm and drove the rifle stock into his cheekbone with her right. Not clean. He'd already started to turn with it, but hard enough. He staggered. She went with him, staying inside his reach, and got behind his rifle arm and put him on the ground. He didn't go down easy. He was heavier than her and significantly stronger, and he knew what he was doing. He got an elbow into her ribs, cracked something, she thought, or badly bruised it, and nearly reversed the position. She went with the momentum instead of fighting it, rolled, came up with the Glock against his temple. He stopped moving. They were both breathing hard. She looked at him. He was mid-40s, close-cropped hair going gray, a face that had spent a lot of time in the sun and the cold and didn't show much of anything. His eyes were steady, not panicked, not calculating, just present. Looking at her the way she was looking at him, professional assessment. There was something else in his face too, though, something she'd heard in his radio voice, that fractional quality of reluctance. "You had a clean shot," he said, "before, at the debris field." "I know. Why didn't you take it?" She kept the Glock steady. "I didn't know who you were." "You know now." "I know your mission," she said. "I don't know who you are." Something moved in his expression, barely. Staff Sergeant Mason Rook, Tier 1, retired. Current contract with... "I don't need the contractor name." "No," he said. "I don't suppose you do." He glanced at the Glock, then at her face. "You going to finish this?" "That depends on you." She held his eyes. The civilians in the bunker, the woman and her daughter. He was quiet for a moment. "My mission is containment," he said, "of the information, of the witnesses. They're a mother and her kid. I know what they are. Then you know what I'm asking." He looked at her for a long time. The ground pulsed beneath him, that deep volcanic breath, stronger now, the tremors coming faster than they had an hour ago. Something was shifting below, something geological and old, and completely indifferent to the conversation happening on its surface. "If I walk away from this," he said slowly, "my contract is void. My clearances are gone. I'm done." "Yes. And if I don't walk away from this, then I shoot you," she said, "and I still go after the antenna." Another long silence. "There's a way out," he said quietly. "The eastern lava tube, past the chamber where the civilians are. It exits on the ridge above the access road. About 900 meters." He looked at the antenna tower on the northern boundary, then back at her. "You shoot that antenna housing, the transmitter battery bank is going to blow. That whole ridge section is Category 3. The tube system is going to collapse." "I know. Your exfil route goes through that ridge." "I know that too." He studied her face for a moment, the same evaluating quality she'd seen in it before, but different now. Not tactical assessment, something older than that. "The antenna shot," he said. "You'll probably make it out. Probably." He paused. "But I've run this terrain. I know the tube system. And you've got 2 civilians who don't." He looked at the Glock again. "I can get them out, if you let me." She held that. She thought about what it meant. She thought about what he was offering and what it cost him and whether she trusted it. She thought about what Hawk had said. "If I can't, you know what I'm going to do." "If you're lying," she said, "and those 2 people don't make it out." "I know," he said. "There is nowhere far enough." "I know," he said again. His voice was even, certain. Whatever he'd been when he came into this zone, whatever the contract had made of him, there was something underneath it that recognized the same weight she was carrying. The weight of a call that couldn't be walked back. She held the Glock on him for 3 more seconds. Then she lowered it. "Get them out," she said. He was already moving. She turned north, toward the fire lookout tower and the Ares control antenna, and the 1,200-meter shot that was waiting for her at the end of it. Behind her, the ground trembled. 1,200 meters. Claire ran the number again as she moved north through the debris field, staying low, using the broken lava flow shelves for cover. 2,000 meters in these conditions meant accounting for ash density in the air column, denser than standard atmosphere, which would slow the round by a calculable fraction and drop it slightly lower than a clean air solution. Wind was currently 7 knots left to right, but it had been shifting every 15 minutes with the thermal cycles off the caldera. By the time the round traveled 1,200 meters, the wind could be doing anything. She had 1 shot at the antenna. 1, because the moment she fired, the remaining Ares turret would reorient to her position. The western unit, the one she hadn't engaged yet, was still operational, its targeting system scanning the northern perimeter. If she missed the antenna or hit it non-critically, she'd be in a 2-front problem with no relay shutdown and a weapons system that would walk fire across the ridge until it found her. She had to make the first round count. The fire lookout tower was visible now, what remained of it. The 1980 blast had taken the upper 2 levels, leaving a concrete stump about 30 feet tall with the steel framework of the original structure twisted around it like a broken spine. The Ares control antenna was mounted to the surviving section of the steel frame, about 20 feet up. A directional dish array, roughly 4 feet across, with the transmitter housing bolted behind it. The transmitter housing was what she needed to hit. The dish itself was hardened, designed to survive ballistic environment. But the transmitter housing behind it, where the actual electronics lived, was a standard commercial enclosure. 1 round through the enclosure, and she'd shut down every Ares unit in the zone simultaneously. She needed to get closer. Not to make the shot, she could make the shot at 1,200, but she needed a stable firing position, and the debris field she was moving through was running out. 50 meters ahead, The terrain opened into a relatively flat ash plain that ran all the way to the tower base. 400 meters of open ground, with the western Ares turret covering the approaches. She stopped behind a lava shelf and glassed the turret. It was 300 meters to her left, elevated on the same fabricated platform design as the northern turret she destroyed in Part 1. Its sensor cluster was performing a slow arc, 45 degrees left, pause, 45 degrees right, pause. Standard pattern search, not acquisition mode. It hadn't found her yet. She had about 20 seconds per sweep cycle before it reoriented. She started timing. Left arc, pause, right arc, pause. 22 seconds per cycle. She needed to cross the open ground and get to the tower base. She needed a stable platform. She had a knee injury from the sprint across the town square that she'd been running on adrenaline and was only now beginning to register. Something in the left knee, probably a hyperextension when she'd gone flat in the ash field. Not debilitating but real. A tax on her speed and stability. She drank the last of her water, ate half a protein bar without tasting it, checked her magazine, 29 rounds remaining after the 2 turret shots. More than enough if she stayed sequenced. The turret's sensor array swept left. Paused. She moved. She crossed the open ground in 31 seconds. The turret completed its right arc and started back left when she was at 200 meters. She went flat and held for 3 seconds, face down in the ash, not breathing, trying to present a profile identical to the volcanic debris field around her. The sensor array swept over her position, kept moving. She reached the tower base as the turret completed its next cycle, pressed her back against the concrete stump, and breathed. The steel framework above her groaned in the wind, a deep, structural moan that came from somewhere stressed and old. The blast damage to the upper section had left the remaining framework in a state of partial failure that decades of seismic activity hadn't improved. She could feel it vibrating against her back. She needed to get off the tower base before she fired. The concussion from the antenna's transmitter battery bank, if Rook had been right about the explosive potential, would come straight down the tower structure. She needed separation. She looked at the terrain. 30 meters to her left, a volcanic rock formation, natural, not constructed, about 5 feet high with a nearly flat top surface. Not ideal, but it gave her a supported firing position with the tower on her left flank rather than directly above. She moved to it. The knee protested. She ignored it. She settled onto the rock formation, prone, and brought the rifle up. Through the scope, the antenna array at what her rangefinder now read as 1,180 meters. The transmitter housing was visible behind the dish. Gray metal enclosure, roughly 18 inches square, with a cable conduit running down the back of it. Target acquired. Wind check. 7 knots, steady left to right. She dialed 2 clicks of windage on the turret. Atmosphere compensation. The ash density had increased slightly in the last 20 minutes. She added a 1/4 mil of elevation. The Ares western turret was 300 meters to her left. It was going to acquire her the moment she fired. She had approximately 4 seconds after the shot before it had a firing solution. She needed to be off this rock and moving before those 4 seconds expired. She ran the sequence in her head. Fire. Roll left off the rock. Go flat in the ash. Move northeast away from the turret's primary arc. Straightforward. If the transmitter blew cleanly and the ridge stayed stable. If the ridge didn't stay stable, the ground pulsed, stronger than before. She felt it in her elbows against the rock, in her chest, in the bones of her face pressed against the rifle stock. The deep volcanic breath had been coming faster for the last 20 minutes. Something below was shifting, adjusting, responding to whatever seismic process had been building in the weeks since the exclusion order went active. The Geological Survey had flagged 11 Category 3 sites. She was lying on one of them. "Hawk," she said quietly. "I'm in position. 1180 to the antenna. Copy. His voice was tight. Claire, before you take that shot, what? A pause, long enough that she started to think he'd lost signal. The contractor partition, he said. I've been in it for the last 20 minutes. There's a document trail, the live fire test authorization, the civilian classifications, the containment order. I've been pushing copies to an encrypted external server. A journalist I know at ProPublica, a Senate oversight staffer who has been investigating Sentinel dynamics for 8 months. Another pause. It's done. The moment the live fire window closes and the test record locks, those copies are going to be in the hands of people who know what to do with them. She held still against the rock. You had access to that this whole time? I had partial access. I needed the live fire window to fully run. It generates a complete log of all autonomous engagements, all civilian classifications, all system parameters. If I triggered the document push too early, I'd only have partial data. They could deny it, claim anomaly. A beat. I needed it complete. She processed that. She thought about what it meant that Hawk had been building a case while she'd been in the field getting shot at. What it meant about his role in all of this, whether he had been navigating or whether he had been complicit and then navigating. She thought about the 17 resolved engagements in the contractor log. She thought about Sarah Tillman and Mia and the 3 weeks of provisions in the concrete bunker. She thought about the fact that Hawk had just done something that was going to end his career, his clearances, and possibly his freedom, and he had done it carefully and methodically and without any drama, exactly the way he did everything. The containment team, she said, the authorization for the second shooter, that's in the document trail? Yes. And your name? A very long pause. Yes, he said quietly. My name is in it too. I was briefed on the test parameters 14 days ago. I raised objections through internal channels. They were logged and dismissed. A breath. I should have done more than raise objections. I know that. She stared through the scope at the transmitter housing. 1,180 meters. Clean sight picture. The crosshairs sitting exactly where she needed them. Hawk, she said. Yeah. When this is over, I know, he said. You're going to have to answer for it. I know, Claire. The ground pulsed again. Hard this time, sharp enough that her scope picture jittered for a half-second before she reacquired. Take the shot, Hawk said. Get those people out. She took a full breath, let half of it out. The wind held steady at 7 knots. The scope picture was clean, thermal distortion minimal at her current elevation. The transmitter housing sharp in the crosshairs. She could see the cable conduit, the mounting bolts, the seam where the two halves of the enclosure joined. She aimed for the seam. Weakest point, maximum fragmentation transfer. She fired. The round was in the air for 1.4 seconds. She counted them. The transmitter housing detonated. Not a small pop, a real explosion, larger than she'd expected. The battery bank going up in a chain reaction that blew the entire antenna assembly off the steel frame and sent burning debris in a 40-meter arc. The tower structure took the blast and groaned, and then the upper section, the already compromised steel framework, separated from the concrete stump and came down in a controlled collapse that wasn't entirely controlled, the steel twisting as it fell, trailing smoke and sparks. She was already moving, left off the rock, flat in the ash. The Ares western turret, she heard it fire, a burst that chewed the top of her rock formation where she'd been lying half a second before. She rolled right, came up moving northeast, low and fast despite the knee. The turret fired again, closer. She went flat again, behind a lava shelf, and pressed herself into it. The turret stopped firing. She waited. 3 seconds. 5. Silence. She raised her head. The Ares western turret was still. Its sensor array had stopped moving. The targeting pod was down. Every autonomous unit in the zone had gone offline simultaneously. She could see it from here, the mechanical stillness that spread across the town like a power outage. Every system freezing in place as the antenna shutdown propagated through the Ares network. The live fire window was still running, but the weapons were blind. She'd done it. She pressed her face against the ash for a moment and just breathed. Then she got up and ran south, toward the lava tube settlement and the civilians she had to get out before the ground finished whatever it was building toward. The eastern lava tube was exactly where Rook had said it would be. Claire found the entrance behind the settlement's storage bunker, a low opening in the volcanic rock, barely large enough to crawl through, partially concealed by a collapsed timber frame that someone had pushed aside recently. The ash around the threshold was disturbed, recent passage, more than one set of marks. She went through. The tube ran east at a shallow downgrade, wider than the tunnel she'd used earlier, the ceiling high enough to stand in the first section. Emergency chemical lights had been cracked and placed at intervals along the floor. Rook's work, she assumed, or possibly Rook had found an existing cache and deployed it. The green-white light made the tunnel look alien, the volcanic rock surfaces catching it in strange facets. She could hear voices ahead, low, controlled, a child's voice asking something, an adult voice answering. She rounded a bend and found them. Sarah Tillman was on her feet, moving. Mia was beside her, holding her mother's hand, but walking on her own, not being carried. Rook was 2 meters ahead of them, his rifle slung, a flashlight in his hand, moving at a pace the child could match. He heard her coming, turned before she was close enough for the light to reach her face. "Antennas down," she said. "Grid is offline." Something moved across his face. She might have called it relief, if she'd thought he was the kind of man who let relief show. 900 meters to the ridge exit, he said. There's a drainage cut about halfway through that the tube passes under. The geological survey marks it as stable, but the tremors, the ground moved. Not the deep pulse she'd been feeling. This was different, faster, sharper, a genuine seismic event that rattled the tube walls and sent small chips of volcanic rock raining from the ceiling. Mia made a sound and Sarah pulled her close. The tremor lasted 4 seconds, then subsided. "Move," Claire said. They moved. The drainage cut was the problem. 900 meters in, approximately where Rook had estimated, the tube narrowed and the ceiling dropped to shoulder height, and then the floor fell away, a 3-foot drop into a lower channel that the drainage cut had opened at some point in the volcanic history of this place. The lower channel was filled with 6 inches of standing water, dark, sulfurous, cold, passable, but slow. Another tremor hit while they were in the low section. This one was harder, a sustained rolling motion, not the sharp jolt of the previous event, but a slow heaving that made the tube walls flex visibly and dropped the ceiling another 4 inches at the narrow point. A section of the wall to Claire's left cracked along a seam that had probably been opening for decades and was now, under the accumulated stress of the live fire test vibrations and the increased seismic activity and whatever larger process was running beneath them, finally opening all the way. The crack ran from floor to ceiling in about 2 seconds. A section of wall the size of a door panel shifted inward. "Go," Claire said. She put herself between the cracking wall and the others and pointed at Rook. "Get them through the narrow section. Don't stop." "What about you?" "Go." He looked at her for 1 second, long enough to establish that he understood and that he was going to comply, and that there was nothing comfortable about either of those things for him. Then he took Mia's other hand and he moved. Sarah looked back at Claire. "Go, Sarah." Sarah went. Claire kept herself against the cracked wall section, one hand braced against the rock, holding it back by main force, which was obviously useless, but which kept her attention on the structural failure rather than the tunnel ahead, and let her hear the sound of footsteps in water becoming farther away. When the sound of splashing had gone around the next bend, she stepped back from the wall, let the section shift another inch inward, and moved. She was through the narrow point when the wall came down. The collapse was loud in the enclosed space, a deep, percussive impact that she felt in her chest and her skull simultaneously. Dust and debris blowing past her from behind. The tube behind her filled suddenly with rubble. She stumbled, caught herself on the far wall, looked back. The passage she'd just come through was gone. No going back. She turned and ran. She came out of the tube into pale gray light and clean, cold air at a run, and nearly ran into Rook, who had stopped 15 meters from the exit with Sarah and Mia, and was looking back at the entrance. He'd been waiting. She registered that without comment. She registered that he'd had 3 minutes with the exit in sight and a clean escape route, and he'd waited. She didn't say anything about it. There wasn't time. The ridge exit came out above the access road, as advertised. Below them, Route 504 curved through the exclusion zone boundary and disappeared into the tree line that marked the end of the restricted area. A mile, maybe a mile and a half to the boundary fence. Passable terrain, steep in sections, but nothing the knee couldn't handle with adrenaline still running. Claire looked back at the exclusion zone. The fire lookout tower was gone. The antenna had taken the upper section, and the collapse had brought the concrete stump down as well. A slow, delayed structural failure that had completed itself while they were in the tube. A column of smoke rose from the site, ash gray and black mixed together, climbing against the pale sky. From here she could see the town. The Ares turrets were still where they'd stopped, frozen mid-rotation, locked in their final scan positions like mechanical statues. The Sentinel ground platforms were motionless in the town square, their coordination networks severed, their engagement protocols suspended. Somewhere to the west, she knew, the drone had come down. Without relay coordination, it would have lost navigation and auto-landed on whatever terrain was beneath it when the shutdown propagated. The settlement below looked the way it had always looked, abandoned, empty, cold, except for the civilian truck on Route 504. Still there, she realized, still on the road where she'd watched it stop after clearing the northern turret's engagement window. The driver had pulled over and waited, not knowing whether to proceed or retreat, and had apparently been waiting ever since. She could see a figure standing beside the truck, looking up at the smoke column. "My husband," Sarah said quietly beside her. "He went to get help. He went to get help and came back with the truck and—" She stopped. "He's been down there this whole time." "He's fine," Claire said. "He's standing right there." Sarah Tillman looked at her daughter. Mia was watching the smoke column with the same focused, evaluating attention she'd had in the bunker. Cataloging, processing, deciding what she thought about it. "We should move," Claire said. They came down the ridge in 20 minutes. The terrain was navigable but demanding. Loose volcanic scree in the upper section, then hardened ash flow that was slippery under boot, then a rocky descent to the road level that required careful footing. Claire went first on the steep sections, checking each step, then watched the others follow. Rook went last. He moved well on rough terrain. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, cataloged, filed, understood. He moved like someone who'd spent a lot of time on ground that could kill him and had learned to treat it with a particular quality of respect. At the road, Sarah Tillman broke into a run. The figure beside the truck turned. A man, late 30s, flannel jacket, the same kind of practical outdoor clothing Sarah was wearing, clearly dressed for the same plan of returning to their property and staying as long as they needed to. And he caught her and the child together, and Claire watched them and thought about the three of them preparing together, planning their return, packing commercial rations into a concrete bunker under a mountain, thinking the worst they were risking was a federal citation. She stopped watching and looked at Rook. He was standing 10 meters away, looking back up at the exclusion zone, at the smoke column, at the frozen Ares turrets visible on the far edge of the town. "What happens to you now?" she asked. "Contract is void." He said it evenly. I'll lose my clearances within 24 hours, as soon as the contractor partition shows no confirmation of completed mission. After that, depends on how far they want to take it. How far do they want to take it? He thought about it. Depends on how much noise gets made. He looked at her sideways. You going to make noise? She thought about Hawk, about the document trail being pushed to ProPublica and the Senate oversight staffer, about 17 resolved engagements in a contractor log. Somebody is, she said. He nodded slowly, accepting it. Then I'd say they'll want to take it fairly far. What will you do? He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the Tillman family, at the husband still holding his wife and daughter beside the truck, the three of them interchangeable in that moment with any three people who had been afraid and were now, for this one moment, not afraid. I don't know yet, he said, but I'll figure it out. He paused. I was good at this job, the parts of it that were worth being good at. He looked at her. I imagine there are other parts worth being good at. She didn't have an answer to that. She wasn't sure one was needed. Her radio crackled. Maddox, Hawk's voice. Thinner than before, the signal was degraded at road level, the ridge blocking his uplink, but clear enough. You're out. We're out, all three civilians. Rook is with me. A pause. Rook. He helped get them out. Another pause, longer. She couldn't tell what he was thinking, and she'd learned a long time ago not to project onto Hawk's silences. Extraction bird is 20 minutes out, he said. Grid reference Delta 7, half-mile east of your current position. There's a clear area beside the drainage retention pond. Copy. Claire, his voice went quieter. Not private exactly. Rook was standing 10 feet away and could probably hear it, but reduced, like he was speaking to her specifically and not to the situation. You made the right calls out there. She thought about that for a moment. She thought about the northern turret she'd taken down without authorization, the relay shot she'd fired knowing it would bring the ridge down, the decision to lower her weapon in front of a man whose mission had included putting a bullet in her. She thought about Kandahar, about the three people who had no idea what was coming and died without understanding why. She thought about Mia, standing in the bunker doorway with her focused, evaluating eyes, asking, is that enough? I don't know yet, Claire said. Ask me in a few years. Hawk was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, that's probably the right answer. The extraction bird was a modified Black Hawk running civilian markings. No unit insignia, no military identification. Standard protocol for contractor-adjacent operations. Claire noted it and said nothing. There would be time later for everything that needed to be said about contractor-adjacent operations. The crew chief helped the Tillman family aboard first. Sarah's husband, his name was Tom, she'd learned on the half-mile walk to the extraction point, a former Forest Service employee who'd been fighting the exclusion order through federal court for 18 months, kept looking at Claire with an expression she recognized. The expression of someone who understood that they were alive because another person had made specific decisions, and who had not yet found the right words for what they wanted to say about it. She didn't need him to find them. You'll be debriefed when you land, she said. Tell them everything exactly as it happened. Don't edit it. Don't minimize it. Everything exactly as it happened. He nodded. He understood what she meant. Mia was the last of the three to board. She stopped at the Black Hawk's door and turned to look at Claire. The focused, evaluating attention again. She seemed to have made a decision about something. Thank you, she said. Claire looked at her for a moment. 9 years old. Standing in the door of a helicopter at the edge of a volcanic exclusion zone, covered in ash, with the composure of someone 3 times her age who'd been through things that shouldn't happen to anyone. Get some sleep, Claire said. You've earned it. Mia climbed aboard. Claire turned to Rook. He was standing at the edge of the landing area, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the Black Hawk's rotors spin up. He hadn't moved toward the aircraft. You're not getting on, she said. I'm not in your extraction manifest. He looked at her. And there are some conversations I need to have before I'm in a room full of people with clearances. He paused. I'll make my own way out. She studied him. She thought about everything the past several hours had revealed about his judgment, and about the moment he'd offered to take the civilians through the tube, and about the 3 minutes he'd spent waiting at the exit when he could have been gone. There's a Senate oversight staffer, she said, working a Sentinel Dynamics investigation. You talk to her first, before anyone else gets to you, before the contractor, before your former chain of command, before anyone who wants to manage your story. She held his eyes. You talk to her first. He held her gaze. And if she wants the whole thing, give her the whole thing. He nodded. Once. The same economy of motion she'd been reading in him since she'd clocked his breath mist above the concrete slab. Staff Sergeant Maddox, he said. Rook. He turned and walked north. Not back toward the exclusion zone, along the road, toward the tree line, toward whatever was waiting for him on the other side of the decisions he'd made today. She watched him until the ash curtain thickened and took him. Then she boarded the Black Hawk. The aircraft lifted and banked east, and the exclusion zone fell away below her. She could see it all from up here. The town of Coldwater Flats with its frozen turrets and empty streets. The settlement slope with the concrete bunkers half buried in volcanic debris. The fire lookout tower's absence marking itself as a void in the landscape. The smoke column had thinned. The Ares units were still in place, still frozen, still pointing at their last known targets like obsolete monuments to someone's idea of automated efficiency. She could see the tracks she'd made across the open ash flat, running for the cistern. She could see the debris field where she'd found Rook's breath mist and filed it and moved on. She could see the secondary hide, the water cistern, the cracked residential ruin where she'd spent the first hours watching a town that wasn't supposed to have anyone in it. She could see the road where the evacuation truck had crossed through the northern turret's engagement window, and she could see the dead ground where the first turret's sensor cluster now pointed at nothing. Shot was never fired. She put her back against the Black Hawk's bulkhead and looked at the overhead and let the vibration of the aircraft travel through her spine. Her radio came alive one last time. Hawk's voice, signal thin at altitude, partially broken by static. Extraction confirmed. You're clear, Claire. I need you to know, the document push completed 30 minutes ago. It's done. There's no pulling it back now. She pressed the transmit button. Copy, Hawk. There's going to be an investigation. Static burst. My name is going to be in it. I want you to know I'm prepared for that. I should have. Hawk. Yeah. You made the call you could make, she said, with what you had when you had it. A long pause. The static cleared briefly, enough that she could hear him breathing. You made the call I couldn't, he said. She thought about the transmitter housing at 1,180 meters. She thought about the crosshairs sitting on the seam. She thought about the 4 seconds she'd had after firing to get off the rock before the western turret acquired her, and the way the knee had felt, and the ash, and the sound of the battery bank detonating like something fundamental had been corrected. We both made calls today, she said. Let's see what they were worth. The signal broke. Static filled the earpiece. She pulled the earpiece out and held it in her palm for a moment, looking at it. Then she put it away. The Black Hawk turned southeast. Below, the exclusion zone shrank. The smoke column thinned to a thread. Mount St. Helens sat at the edge of visibility to the south, massive, ancient, indifferent to the specific human decisions that had been made in its shadow today, and yesterday, and 17 times before that, in contractor logs that called it resolution. Sarah Tillman was asleep 2 seats down, her daughter's head on her shoulder. Tom had his eyes closed and his hands clasped in his lap, and his lips were moving slightly, which Claire chose to interpret as gratitude rather than prayer, though she understood there was often very little difference. She looked at her rifle. The suppressor needed cleaning. The bolt carrier group needed a full inspection. She'd put it through more than standard field tolerances today, and she could feel the difference in the cycling. The scope mount would need a torque check. The shot to the first turret sensor had transmitted more recoil than the system was typically calibrated for, given the angle, and she didn't trust any scope that had taken that kind of shock without verification. She began field stripping the bolt. Methodical, precise, the work of hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Hawk had taught her this too, not the technical procedure, she'd learned that in training, but the practice of it, the deliberate return to the physical and specific after chaos. The way you measured what had happened by what remained, what was clean, what needed cleaning, what was serviceable, what was gone. She ran the bolt through a dry patch. Her tablet pinged, a mission alert from an encrypted command channel. She looked at the preview, new assignment, different zone, different system. She read the first paragraph, put the tablet face down on the seat beside her, finished cleaning the bolt. Outside the window, Washington State rolled away to the south under a sky the color of ash and distance, and the mountain faded slowly into the horizon, and the smoke from the antenna tower faded with it, and there was nothing visible of the exclusion zone anymore. Nothing to indicate from altitude that anything had happened there today, or yesterday, or 17 times before that. The bolt went back into the receiver. The rifle was ready. The tablet blinked on the seat beside her. She didn't pick it up yet.